you can't say, hey, I want to build a 1-story building and then change order to a 3-story building, because it just doesn't work that way. It's one thing like, hey, I want to paint a wall or make a small change. Okay, that's fine. But some of these change orders were pretty girthy, and it's like, hey, we need some more time on these change orders.
So we have Clark Lowe on the podcast today. Welcome, Clark.
Hey, Brad, how's it going? Thanks for having me on.
Excited to have you. He's president and CEO of O'Connor Company. And I have one question I've been waiting to ask you forever, ever since we met at the Coalition Summit. And I'm like, Clark, I'm just going to bring you on and ask you there because it'd be more organic. So I think what was unique about you being at the summit is you mentioned that a lot of your workers work remote, which I feel like that's something that I've really struggled with to figure out how to do that as a construction company, because a lot of it's hands-on, it's in person, face-to-face. How have you mastered the systems and protocol to have so many remote workers?
I think it'd be a stretch to say that we've mastered it. But the amount of, right, because Amazon, Silicon Valley, they're all recalling everybody, and they have infinite money. They have infinite access to resources, infinite technology. We're about the real focus is on this, what I call this self-regulated individual contributor. So that's like this buzzword that we have internally, is how do we develop people to be self-regulated enough to work remotely or work hybridly. And that's a tough question, because anything out there from like a leadership world perspective, any of the books, that nothing talks about like these unique challenges in a way that really talks about how the polarity reverses with remote work people, because it's all about like that polarity reverses, right? Because you have to trust them first. And usually it's like you kind of garner and you own that a little bit of that trust and leverage as the owner. And it's been a very unique experience letting that go. And some people can do it very well. And I think most people really struggle with remote work and being super productive.
How do you manage that though? I mean, just from like, at surface level, being a manager of remote workers, whether it's, check-ins, accountability, how are you knowing that, am I giving them too much work? Do they not have enough? How, not that you're trying to track every second of their day, but how do you monitor just the overall productivity?
So you actually talked about it a lot at the coalition, when you say, hey, like, I openly say I know the least about construction than everybody in my company. Like, I'm the business guy, right? And you talk about it a lot, about driving down those empowered decisions. That really is the key, is like all of our like project managers and site supers, our estimators, they are making 90% of the decisions in the company day to day. And it's probably more than that, 95. I make like 2 big decisions a day, and that's my life, right? If I make 2 impactful decisions, like I've had a good day.
Yeah, I like that. 2 decisions, that's a big day. That's pretty impressive. So when you say even 2 big decisions a day as a CEO, you know, because of the delegation and empowerment that you've handed down to your team, what does that entail typically when you're making decisions? What part of the business are you focused on?
I'm focused on the large, like, strategic horizon of the business. How do we, like, as you know, you've exponentiated a company as well. The hardest part that I think a lot of entrepreneurs underestimate is how hard it is to replicate a process. It is very easy to build one house. And if that's your whole focus, is how do you have multiple projects? How do you have multiple buildings all in different alignment? All, like, we're a national GC, so you're talking all over the nation. How do you replicate that? And that becomes, and the only way you can really successfully replicate and stay remote is, again, give empowering people that typically don't make decisions in construction companies with real decisions, like real dollar decisions. And that has been a hard thing with my teams. They're like, I've never worked for a general contractor where I can approve a $15,000 change order without asking anybody. And our change orders are a little bit different than ours, because our change orders typically a lot of times cost us money. So, and we're all about like, hey, we're looking to facilitate, get the project done. And our focus right now is on the top line. How do we explode revenue growth? And then And then secondary to that is how do we create efficiencies in the process that will start to recapture that back over time? Because we can't do both at the same time. It's just too much work happening. So we'll focus on the top line, and as that grows, then we'll come back behind and start to focus like how do we generate those efficiencies.
Maybe for context, before I ask the next question, maybe you speak to home base of operations, and then size of company at the current current date.
Yeah, so home base is Pinehurst, North Carolina, golf capital of the world. So any golfers out there, they
Yeah,
know
it's a
exactly what
good place for
Pinehurst is.
golf.
It
Yeah.
is great place for golf. We do a lot of work with Pinehurst Resort, but right now we have just over 50 employees that work for us. We'll be knocking on the door to 60 million this year, with a goal next year of 85 million and then 120 million in 2026. Or those are our kind of formal goals. So yeah, that's kind of like the girth. And right now, I think we're operating 12 states, from California to Florida, New York. We're getting ready to get started in Illinois, Utah, and just about everywhere in between.
Okay. So I have so many questions for you. I mean, this is incredible, Clark. So, I think just from a metric standpoint, we talk about KPIs, key performance
Yep.
indicators, and, a lot of, especially in the trades, general contracting, there's kind of an easy KPI that if you're doing $1 million per employee, you're at a very healthy business, right? I mean,
Yep.
ideally you should be in a good place. So you're going to do 60 million, 50 employees. That puts you, over the 1 million per employee, which puts you in a great spot. The biggest challenge with construction is mobilizing in a new area, right? The reason being is
Hmm.
you have to have boots on the ground. You have to have a superintendent willing to travel. Commercial companies can do it because they have a very strong process, home base. They do have traveling supers. A lot of them are willing to travel. The drawback is sometimes they may not be getting the best electricians or the best plumbers, right? As they're in a new
Yep.
market, building a charter school, and they're in and out. How have you, I don't want to say perfected, but maybe we'll start here. When you look at um, just the field management, how have you found talent that's willing to say, okay, we're based out of Pinehurst, but yeah, Clark, I'm willing to go to California and then Utah and then New York. How do you find, just from a superintendent project management level, that personnel to run these projects?
Coincidentally enough, this was another thing I found fascinating at the coalition is how closely we are on this. And this is like the biggest unlock that we've had is actually segregating paperwork. So our APMs, we have two APMs for every project, regardless of size. We have two APMs on the project that they handle 95% of the paperwork on every project. And these are public jobs. And as you know, with some of your commercial background, we're
Yep.
talking on the magnitudes of 400 or 500 submittals per
Yep.
job, average public job.
Right.
And so we have two APMs on every
Real
job.
quick, break the acronym APM. So I know what that is, but explain to the audience.
So our APM is Assistant Project Manager, and they are the brain trust and, in my opinion, probably the most crucial part of a project when it comes to the quality of a project. Your APMs, like our APMs interface, they lead meetings just like yours do. Our APMs lead the meetings, they lead change orders, they lead pricing with subs. And really, we've combined the PM and site super. So most of our site supers travel. So what we do is our site supers travel for 3 to 4 weeks on, and then we pay them a full week away from the job. They get a full week paid away from the job. And during that week, our PM covers. And our PMs, they travel 2 weeks a month, and our PMs only ever have two jobs under them. So the 2 weeks that they're traveling, they're covering the site super, and then the other 2 weeks they're working remotely. And then what we've done is we've bifurcated the things that project supers or site supers and project managers hate, and that's paperwork. And we've given all of that to our remote based APMs.
And that makes sense. And that's essentially my role. And I know you and I spoke about this. I have project coordinators, PC project
Yep.
coordinator, which APM, I mean, it's very similar from what their load is. And that makes sense, right? Your APMs, your coordinators, they could be remote. That's not an issue. They're handling RFIs and submittals and samples and budgets and change orders and leading the meetings, whatever they may be. What about your supers, though? To find supers willing to travel, how difficult has that been for you?
With our platform, it's actually been pretty easy because what supers are afraid of is getting stuck on the road. So, like a lot of people will be like, "Oh yeah, you're going to come home." That's the feedback we get. Where you're going to be home every 3 to 4 weeks, 5 weeks, we actually cash in on that and we perform that and we do it. And it's a big piece of the company of making sure that we deliver on what our site supers, what we say we're going to do. So our site supers are home for a full week every 3 to 4 weeks. We'll pay for their airfare to go home. If they're in a cool place, sometimes we'll fly out their spouse for the weekend or for the week. We're already paying for the hotel rooms, right? So we'll fly out the spouse. So like we had a guy in Vegas, his wife was there, and we flew out his spouse, and they spent like 5 days in Vegas together. So it kind of removes a little bit of that suck factor from being on the road. Obviously, we pay for all their expenses. And another thing that we do is we pay for their expenses. Expenses are not reimbursements to our site supers. We proactively pay for all their hotels and everything, so they're not seeking reimbursement from those for their travel expenses.
Now, I understand just for the health of the employee, marriage, whatever may be personal life, that, hey, I'm going to be in California for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, then I come home for a week, which is a little bit more tangible and feasible for them. How do you manage the project when they're gone? What is your play for the owner that you're committed to have boots on the ground, to be supervising? How do you pivot through that when they're not on site?
So our PMs are on site for that week. So when our site super isn't there, our PMs are on site acting as the site super. So that's how we've unlocked that, because we still need to maintain for safety, for obviously legal reasons, OSHA reasons. We have to have those boots on the ground. So that's how whenever the super's not there, the PMs, it's their job to cover, and that's why our PMs only work 2 projects.
Oh, I got you. But when you said APM, that's different though, right? Your APM is different than the PM. These are separate
Correct.
roles, right?
Correct. So we have project managers. So think about it this way: our project manager and site super are almost one person, because like our project manager, they are a typical project manager role. They're focused on scheduling. They're focused on like the strategic, like kind of marrying that strategic outlook to the tactical execution. And that's the project supervisor, the site supervisor, and the project manager together, they tackle that workload. And then the assistant project managers, again, there's 2 of them on every project. They're helping with RFIs, they're helping with submittals, change orders, all the things from a project perspective. A lot of paperwork on the commercial side, or on the public projects especially. There's a lot of paperwork that goes along with that.
How much of your work is residential as opposed to commercial?
We have very little residential work, so
Yeah.
that's what made the coalition even more, at least, awesome from our side.
Well, I mean, maybe speak to that. I mean, I know you went to the coalition. You're very seasoned. You're very experienced. I mean, it showed right away when you were speaking and with the questions you had, Clark. Um, I know. I would imagine in the commercial you're doing either a cost plus or a hybrid, some sort of lump sum. But either way, you're very conscious of the GCs, the general conditions. Not that I'm going to ask you to share that on this podcast, but you mentioned you have to have travel in the jobs, you have to have per diem in the jobs, you have hotel. I mean, these are true general conditions. Do you feel that this? How challenging is it for you to win some of these jobs, knowing you could be competing against a sub that's local or closer, and you're going to have added fees for travel, for a PM to step in, for a superintendent to step in, lodging, everything that goes into running these from afar.
Yeah, so a big piece is finding Zach Froyo, who's my business partner, and he's the VP of pre-construction. And between him and Nick Miller, who's Nick, think of Nick as like your young guy, right? The back of his business card has like 20 different tiles, because he's like our AI guru. He's anything technology. Between those 2, they find amazing projects for us to bid, because we can't just go bid any project. So we look for projects. Typically now we're trying to get to a point where like a $10 million project would be a small project for us, which helps absorb these costs much more. And then sometimes, like, we might know someone locally. We might have a project manager. Like we started looking at projects out near like Columbus, Ohio, which is another up and coming area, because we have an estimator that lives out in Akron, a couple hours away. So we do try to find opportunities to piggyback on, like, okay, we have a lot of remote people, but where can we tie in? And then if you notice on the bottom of all of our it's email signatures, we have just our home base. Like mine will say Goshen, New York, and hers will say Akron, Ohio. So it gives the company a little bit feel a bigger. And when we win a job in that area, we'll typically try to keep them involved in a cursory way that helps things seem very local to the area.
That's incredible. So being that you do have field personnel that live in other parts of the country, of course, it makes sense. Akron, Ohio to Columbus. I mean, was that 2 hour drive? I mean, it's like,
Yep.
uh, you know, Akron has a good golf course, right? Is where
Yes.
Firestone. So it's like I've done that trip only because one of my builder toys in Columbus and we played Firestone, so I know that drive. Actually, I've done that. Um, but going back to the personnel side, um, it makes sense that yeah, superintendents can be 2 or 3 weeks on, 1 week off. The PM's probably now two out of 4 weeks he's on the road or she's on the road. Run these projects. Um, Sophistication wise, it's easy on paper to execute this or say this could be achievable. Running a business as you and I do, I know the complexity between someone who's on site running a project, point of communication for all the trade partners and suppliers, up to date on the schedule, working with the client or owner. There could be an owner's rep, which I'm sure you have on some of these commercial projects. You have,
Yep.
the client, the bank, the designer, the architect. You have these different parties. And so the level of execution and SOP and organization for a superintendent just to step off and not have his phone ringing nonstop and have the PM step in, walk through just the amount of time you spend in processes and systems to be in a position where that baton handoff is so clean, not just from department to department, but just midstream on a project.
Yeah, so I mean, you can understand it's really hard to describe because, like you said, fundamentally it sounds pretty simple. But as you know, life and business is really in the nuance, right? And so we keep our project managers and site supers there. Like I said, that we think of them almost as one person. So both of our assistant project managers, our project manager, our site super, they're all in every meeting. So it's like you kind of create this hive mind effect with every project because they are in every meeting. And so our APM, our assistant project managers, they're only ever on 3 projects. So it's not like these teams have 6 or 8 projects, which happens in most, especially on the commercial side. It's not, most assistant project managers are on 4, 3, 4, 5, 6 projects as a component of that project. And their paperwork is split up a little bit differently and the workload is handled differently. But I think that's a big piece of it. And then one of the things I think of myself as in the company now is like I'm government and there's very little that I'm stepping into that I'm actually having any benefit in. So I stay as much out of the work as humanly possible because I'm so far removed from the work now. I feel bad. An owner will call me and with an issue and I have no idea what the issue is. And I'm like, I'm going to have to circle back with the team. And then I almost never go back to the owner. I'll get with my project manager or my senior PM and say, hey, there's this issue. Can you get back with the owner? So it's been weird having that transition and like not knowing what's going on day to day coming from someone who, a few years ago, I was the project manager and then the director of operations and I knew very intimately what was going on in the projects. Now I don't. And I have teams that do that far better than I ever did in my career for sure.
I'm not sure if your employees will listen to this or if this is relevant, if you can answer, but I would imagine is that site super pay is different than a PM pay, right? Just as far as, on the org chart, cost. Um, if that is the case, how, as you're budgeting general conditions into a project in the estimating process, I would imagine over time now you have data collection, you've run numbers, you've done
Mm-hmm.
job costing, you have a good idea of what this project is going to take. How does that play a role as you're calculating hours? Are you setting just an allowance? Is it a percentage of total? How are you working just through the management side? The lodging is pretty straightforward. 10 months, you're going to charge X per night. Like that's
Yep.
fine, but the labor aspect does vary, especially depending on, am I having a senior PM there, an APM? Am I having my superintendent? I would imagine their hourly rates are different. And so how are you calculating just to give a pretty realistic budget to the client?
So all of our site supervisors, assistant project managers, PMs, everybody in the company's salary. The only people that in our company that are not salary our frontline. We do have a handful, about a dozen frontline carpenters that help us with demo, help us with client calls, etc. Warranty issues. They help us on that front. Everyone else, so 40 of the 52, I think we're up to now, people in the company are salaried. So that makes figuring this stuff out very easy.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Which for sure, I would imagine their salary, but if you don't mind me asking, I'd imagine even if they're salary, their hourly rate's different that you're going to charge for,
Mm-hmm.
say this may or may not be the case, but let's say a good PM's 200 grand and a great site super is 150 and a great assistant PM is 120. I mean, you're still going to have an hourly rate, right, for these
Correct.
positions. So, how do you budget how many hours? If I'm the owner and you're coming to me, Clark, saying, okay, Brad, here's our presentation for O'Connor Company to do your
Mm-hmm.
project. Do you allocate a monthly rate? Do you allocate, so many hours that they'll have a PM and a super and an APM and so forth?
Yeah, so we do, and what we sell them is the system, right? Because our system is so different. So we sell them how we have people on site, and our projects are projects are very overstaffed. And when you look at it, so most of our projects, here's our staffing. We'll have a senior PM or project executive attached to a project. We have a project manager. We have a site super. We have two assistant project managers. We have a project accountant, and we have an office administrator. So every project has 7 people that are keyed into the project and helping some way. And when you write, and it's not for us, it's less because most of our work isn't cost plus. Most of our work is gross maximum price
It is GMP.
with GMP with less than 10% margins, overhead and profit. Like that's
Wow.
like my average work. So when it comes to that, it goes back to what I drill, and my company will probably, they know we drill 3 things: communication, organization, and disciplined execution. Those 3 things are what a GC is. We don't build things; our subs build things, and we can't compete. The only way we can compete with most general contractors out in the world is changing the landscape. So that's what we have to do. I can't compete with, the Turners and the Gilbanes of the world by doing what they do because they already do it so exceptionally well.
Hmm.
The only way we can compete is by changing the landscape. And that's why we're all in on this remote work, and we're all in on some of these different ideas of how we utilize personnel within the company, because our roles are very different than a traditional contractor.
Yeah, and this doesn't change the conversation, but it's interesting about understanding your GMP as opposed to cost plus. That definitely changes probably my question as far as allocating hours and how you're figuring out
Yep.
just the overhead. I think the unique angle to this though is being that you're GMP. I mean, you have to be highly efficient. I mean, not that you're overstaffing, but to having 7 people, of course, that's going to give you a leg up because you're coming in with the structure that I feel as a client. I'm hiring you, Clark, and I'm like, okay, they're super staffed, so I know I'm going to get the utmost attention. Where you have to be efficient internally to hit that profit is you have overhead that's burning on these projects. And so,
Mm-hmm.
how does schedule play a role? How does estimating and pre-com play a role just to make sure that you do have sufficient GCs in here to cover not only your costs, but then ideally make a profit at the end of the day, at the end of the project?
It all starts with estimating. We have, I will say, bar none, no offense to your team, the best estimating team on the planet. No doubt. We just won an $11 million bid today by 40,000, and we lost a $6 million bid by 3,000. Our bidding is so close every single time. We're top 1, 2, or 3 on every bid that we do. It gives us a lot of comfort in being able to take risk where we can take risk to win projects. And we know when we do projects, we have them at a very good cost. And it all starts with the estimating core. And I was mentioning Zach Froyo, who's our VP of pre-construction. He came from a big contractor, and he has really developed that team, and it's really been awesome to watch them blossom and really take this.
Awesome
We
blossom.
Awesome blossom.
Sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
it's been awesome watching him take the team, grow the team, and be able to replicate and exponentiate a process. Because when I came into this company in 2022, we did 100% private work, and 80 to 90% of that work was with one client. And since then, now that client's about 30% of our workload. and the remainder of our work is commercial and or public work.
Um, it's interesting you bring up the estimating and how valuable your estimating team is, and I'm glad you made emphasis there. Not at this one, in previous coalition summits that we've had, Tim Wingate came, and Tim Wingate,
Mm-hmm.
he specializes in construction accounting, and I remember the first time I heard him speak, and he said, what's more important to the profitability of a company? He said, estimating or scheduling. Right. And I think most of us would look at that, and at least in the room, everyone rose their hand. It was like 90% in both sessions that he taught that it was scheduling. And he
Mm-hmm.
said, or I'm sorry, estimating. Sorry. Most people thought it was estimating. And he said, no, it's scheduling. And it's interesting because, this goes back to your efficiency that, yeah, estimating, and you have an incredible estimating department where you know the numbers. But at the end of the day, no matter how well you know those numbers and how good you are, Clark, as you and I both know, if that schedule bleeds out, especially if you're at a GMP, if this build time
Mm-hmm.
goes from 6 months to 14 months, it doesn't matter how well those subcontractors were bid and contracted, and that 8 months of GCs with 7 staff members here, you're going to
Yep.
bleed out. And it was
Correct.
interesting to understand that scheduling is so much more important than estimating. And, you know, you as GMP, I just would imagine that this is a huge focus of yours along with the estimating.
Yep, we're actually working as a company to hire on not someone right now. We're taking interviews for someone to do nothing but scheduling.
Yeah,
And so
right.
it's funny you bring that up. So one of the internal concepts that we just got done talking about on an ops call a couple of weeks ago was this idea that the estimating has a different job in winning a job than our project management team does in executing a job. So how it works is our estimating actually win the work, and then our project management team, they like tear it all apart and they buy a lot of times they buy it a different way because the objectives of the two teams are different. So they have competing urgencies and different priorities, and scheduling becomes an enormous piece of that point. So if you ask me like what's more important, I would agree that scheduling is more important. Estimating is where us at O'Connor, where we get our competitive advantage is in the estimating for sure. And I think working competitive advantage into scheduling is something that comes with scale and weight. Like right, Gilbane, they and Turner, they have a lot of weight in scheduling because their contracts are so tight that the subs just have to conform. It's not someone you mess with because, Gilbane with liquidated damages and everything they have in their contracts, they'll bury you. So you have to fit their schedule. And we're working towards a little bit more of that model, but I would agree scheduling is, I tell all of our site supers, our whole team knows we make the most money when we get out of a project. Like we make the most money. The way we extend profit is not through change orders. A lot of my overhead and profit on change orders is actually capped in the public realm.
Mm-hmm.
Like I get 5% and I don't get any PM time, no additional supervision. So change orders are useless to me. It's about getting
You.
out of the project. They hurt me. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Change orders hurt my bonding. Yep. So if I have a big change order job, I always have to go back to my bonding company and be like, yeah, these change orders had a gravitational effect on the project. Like I have a job that started off at 7.5 and it's going to end around 8.8. And all that 1.3 million, I only get 5% overhead and profit to cover my bonding, to cover my insurance. So that's like 2.5% right there. So I get like 2.5% on it, which like I lose money on change orders on that project.
Oh, it's
So,
horrible.
it's just the way the
Clark,
government project stuffs are run. So yeah.
I mean, anyone who's running a business, understanding the numbers you're putting out there, if you're running $1.5 million to the company at 5%, and you're not getting added GCs to that, and you have to increase your bonding capacity, those margins become slim because that duration is longer. So that eats into your bottom line. I mean,
Yep.
that's just killer. I mean, that almost makes it where you're like, hey, you want a change order? Too bad. We're going to finish the project. You do a change order when we're done.
Exactly. And we do have those conversations like just this company. And we did end up recapturing some of it because I was like, guys, you can't say, hey, I want to build a 1-story building and then change order to a 3-story building because it just doesn't work that way. Because, it's one thing like, hey, I want to paint a wall or, make a small change. Okay, that's fine. But some of these change orders were pretty girthy. And it's like, hey, we need some more time on these change orders, which they did finally amend that to us. But it still wasn't anywhere in the realm of like what we would get if we actually bid it. So that's a little annoying, but that's kind of how the project works.
Yeah, and you mentioned some large GCs, and I have a lot of friends that work for large general contractors, and the LDs, the liquidated damages, is something that, and this goes back to the scheduling point. I mean, you build in a Walmart,
Oh,
you're charged 100 grand a day for every day you're late. I mean, you
yep,
could bid that as tight as you want estimating, but if your schedule's off and you're paying 100 grand a day in LDs, like that project becomes pretty painful here very quickly as you don't hit those deadlines. Um, for you, Clark, as you look at, you mentioned you're building in California and you're doing government work. Are those prevailing wage jobs? The only reason I ask is because as you're working in different markets, whether it's all union based, whether it's prevailing wage,
hmm
I mean, this greatly changes, especially if we're working for the school district and other parts in California. It's definitely going to change, those rates. And how important is it for your estimating team to just be on board of, what the union regulations are, and how what percentage have to be union as you're qualifying for these
yep.
jobs and bidding them appropriately because prevailing wage, I mean, it's changed now, but when I was in college working, you could go from $15 an hour to $36 an hour, for the same
Yep.
title or same qualification.
Yeah, it's definitely complex. The good and bad side of public work is it's on paper, right? So our average spec book is usually 3 to 4 thousand pages, and then with that comes thousands of pages. All the like, it's not hard. You can go find the prevailing wage or the union rates. They're all right there in the collective bargaining agreements,
Right.
all in federal documents. So you just have to go find them. So that's where I was talking about our AI guy, Nick Miller. He's doing a huge job of like teaching AI to rip apart these spec books and get it into digestible information for our estimators. So those guys have done amazing work. That team, like I said, I can't speak highly enough around, really both our estimating and our project management team. But the estimating team, we're doing a lot of new innovative stuff on the estimating side that would probably make a lot of construction companies cringe, but it's working out so well for us right now. For now.
Yeah, for now. How do you work through training and onboarding, being that you have so many people remote all over the country? I would imagine retention can be a challenge, maybe not. Whether you have good retention or not, there's still continuous training. And, you mentioned the importance of having full-time scheduler, which many of these companies do have full-time scheduling. But just from an overall pragmatic training, communication, operations, how do you continue to stay in front of that?
Yeah, so retention is a huge piece for us. Like I've been CEO almost a year, and we've turned two people in the whole company. So, in the
Out of,
time, and
out of
even
50.
out of 50, we've turned
Yeah.
two. So, the last company I worked for them for about 2 years, and they turned it like almost 100% per year.
Oh my gosh.
And so the average company is usually around 25, 30, 40% depending on your industry, and
Mhm.
it's one of the things that we're super proud of. And it's also how we've kind of got the system right. So because one of the reasons we have two assistant project managers on every job is because you kind of create a network, and it's not like the two are on the same job. They all kind of like mesh with each other, like Sally and Bob, and then Sally and Dave, and then Sally and whoever. Well, that's how they spread those projects. And what that does from a quality control perspective is if we happen to have someone leave, or realistically people generally don't leave us, both of these cases we had to terminate them for performance. So in both of those cases, so we don't have people once they come on board with O'Connor, we have open PTO. Our employees get about 40 days off a year. We cover 100% of their medical, so they have no medical premiums when they work for us. So we really take, that's a huge piece of keeping people with the company. And then again, it's like it's a very flattened atmosphere. So where the people who are close to work are making decisions, and a good symptom of that, a nice symptom of that, is you don't have this like dimorphic thing happening where like the CEO is an idiot because I'm making every decision, and it's just like the polar opposite of what someone else would think is realistic. They're making their own decisions in the trenches of the project. So it's hard to hate yourself when you're the one making the decision.
Oh, it's powerful. It's amazing. I mean, what you mentioned that you were with O'Connor for the last year and a half. What led you to join this position? I understand the benefits are great. What appealed to you to come join the firm?
That might be a whole nother podcast. So short story, I worked for a real estate arm back in 2020, right when COVID started, and they wanted to stand up a general contracting division. And so I stood up that general contracting division, built the team. We did about 20 million the first year, did just over 2 million profit. And I held all their licensing, like Florida, Alabama, New York. So I asked the owners, like, hey, can you kick me some equity here? I asked for 10%, and they told me to get bent. So I was like, so I did. And I actually found O'Connor and started the process of purchasing them, which took about two years to complete the deal. So as part of that process, remember when I said earlier, originally the company was like 90% through one client, all all that was 90% of their revenue came through one client. So we couldn't get a bank on board with the deal. So me and my partner, Zach Froyo, we joined and we started winning a bunch of work so we could diversify the company and then get a bank behind the deal. So me and Zach worked with the company for over a year before we were able to get the deal over the line.
That's incredible because I know that you have experience, if I'm not mistaken, on the value businesses, on how to sell them, how to buy and set structures.
Yep.
Um, where did that experience come from? Just in your business acumen?
So I was, I'm kind of a nerd, voracious reader, and I did end up teaching graduate business for Mercy University for about 8 years. So I taught on the graduate side, and I did do some consulting for IBM, Walmart. I did consulting on a couple mergers and acquisitions in the medical field. So that's kind of where, like, it's kind of this weird tangential experience. But when you're around a lot of people at that level, you kind of you start to learn how people think at that level, and that's a very powerful thing. And being around executives and being around business owners really changed the dynamic because I started realizing like these people think very differently than me, and that's when I started getting into reading and started like really studying like the nuance of business.
All right, Clark. Well, I'm going to put you on the hot seat a little bit here. So when you mentioned that you're around these CEOs and they think different, the level of thinking is different. Like what specifically, what are they looking at when they're evaluating a business, whether it be longevity, whether it be valuations, what is it that they're targeting that you've noticed it's different than maybe you and I or the layperson would look at?
But it's very difficult to talk to people about strategic horizon of a business. And I've found that, and even in my short time as a CEO, that's what I've found. These business, like if you think about Elon Musk, which I'm a huge Elon Musk guy, is like this human is able to somehow put like this strategic landscape together without it existing. And then that when you evaluate a business, that's how you kind of have to look at it. How, not just the business and its base value, because a lot of people, when they purchase a business, they're purchasing the tactical function of the business. They're purchasing the tactical day to day of the business. And the hard part is like, how do you take that tactical, framework that you're purchasing and turn it into a strategic landscape? And that is one of the hardest things to do in the world, I think. And it's why it's why most businesses fail. Even in our capitalism, most businesses start and fail. It's a very difficult world out there because it is not very many people can think and understand the business world from a strategic landscape.
So if I'm breaking this down, I mean, my understanding of this comment here, Clark, as we walk through this, if you and I are looking at, there's a couple of variations of business. At its simplistic nature, you may have a company that's producing widgets, right? They're producing a product over and over. You
Mm-hmm.
can look at inventory, you can look at profit margin, customer acquisition, customer retention, all these different things. Pop out evaluation, that's one aspect, right? The second side is like a fee-based business, which in its essence would be O'Connor, be AFT, other ones that
Yep.
we're only as good as sales and operations. Do we finish on time? Do we avoid LDs? Whatever it may be. With that said, you can look at revenue, you can look at cash flow and so forth, and profit margin. And if you take out, you probably have some additives, maybe social media, maybe the personnel, maybe years of business,
Mm-hmm.
reputation. I mean, there's different things that go into this valuation. At the end of the day, someone's willing to say, okay, Clark, I'm going to pay you or Brad, I'm going to pay you for AFT X
Yep.
dollars because of the brand you've built, right?
Correct.
And if you're not the face, can I continue to make sales? Can I continue to hit this revenue? That's fine. But what you're speaking of, I think most of us understand it at that level. But when you talk about the strategic landscape, it's almost like opening a door to O'Connor Company. Like they may have two or three regions they're building in. What's the vision I could bring in to make this nationwide, to bring it over 52 states? What's, you know, is there a different client I can get in front of to change revenue 10x, right? And so when you speak about strategic landscape, it's also not only looking at the business as it is, but what can it become? What are the different
Hmm.
avenues?
Correct.
Maybe there's elbow space and other ways that we can create revenue in addition to what this business owner was just solely focused here, but they should be looking at X, Y, Z.
Yeah, and that's like kind of the dare to dream a little bit. And I'll tell you, the hardest part of doing this whole thing is not a single person around me thought it was a good idea. My mom hated it. My wife hated it. Truth be told, me and my wife almost got divorced over this
Oh
decision
no.
because she's like, you have like I was making a lot of money as a director of operations, very good role, very good, a lot of travel, but just a very good job. And she's like, my mom and anybody around me is like, why would you throw that away to go do this? And I was just like, I don't know. It's just like calling me for some reason. And it's been something that I've always wanted to do. But really, back to your question about the strategic landscapes, it's just like, it's the only thing that isn't commoditized in our current economy is imagination. Like you think about, like, think how long it took Uber to get copied by Lyft. It was like a matter of months, like 18 months, and the system was up and running. And nowadays that's even faster. So if you have like a great idea, a great product, it's going to get commoditized very fast. So your imagination engine has to continually be moving, and you have to continue to dare to dream, because if not, if you just find your little niche and continue to operate in that niche, you'll have a couple good years, but then you're just going to get squashed because the business world around you, where there's an opportunity to make money, it's going to exponentiate very quickly, and then you either move and grow, or you don't.
The imagination aspect is, it's fascinating because, you think about the Uber concept and anyone really could think of something to that magnitude. There's definitely an aspect to, you know, building the apps and the software and, the
Hmm.
qualifications and everything you go through at that aspect. But I think it was Mark Cuban, right? That's like, that's the biggest mistake. He's like, there's no,
Yep.
there's no way this is ever going to work. You getting in a stranger car that you have no idea who they are and you're taking strangers. Like he's like, there's no way. Safety, like there's no way. And yet all of us use Uber and Lyft all the time.
Yep. It's amazing because to me, I do the same thing with my big, like, the example I use, the business case I use is Blockbuster, right? Blockbuster 20 years ago, like Blockbuster fell because there was like this corporate board meeting, and
Mhm.
and all of these experienced business people, hundreds of years of business experience, are say Blockbuster is going to thrive because the serendipity of meeting your neighbor at the store just can't be replicated online, and like when you talk about some of these things out loud now, it seems like, man, like how silly was that. And to me, like, as you and I grow as CEOs, the hardest thing to do is like, how do we not turn every problem into, like, how do not we not become the hammer and nail, you know so to speak. Like every single problem becomes this, hey, I've done this before and this is the solution. And that's the hardest thing for me as a CEO, is I I am very cautious of unanimous consent. Like if I have someone telling me everybody thinks this, I'm like, that something's wrong with that. We're not pushing hard enough. We're not taking enough risk, because this idea of like everybody getting behind something, like, the world is pretty polarized right now and 50-50. And I think most decisions should be fairly polarized 50-50 if you're doing anything truly remarkable. I don't think there's anything that's happened where there's been like unanimous consent, like this is a really good idea. Like nothing remarkable happens in that space.
Did you have any reservations personally, Clark, as you were coming into O'Connor Company, knowing that, hey, you haven't been in construction your entire life. Here you are running, a very complicated national brand. Um, any concerns there? I mean, at the core, I guess before I let you answer, I mean, you know, uh, to be successful, like, and I talk about this on the podcast all the time, is that you're a business owner that happens to focus in construction. At the core, you understand business, you understand balance sheets, you
Mhm.
understand, you know, um, cash flow. Like these are important things to be very successful in your field. And yeah, there's application and there's know-how, but just at the at the surface level, what reservations did you have coming into this role?
Um, just not knowing. Obviously, it was really hard to bet on myself and say, but I've been fortunate that the universe has always seemed to align for me in some weird way from a karma perspective. And that this was no different. Like, right, there's lots of things that had to happen. Like I had no like personal wealth or equity coming into this. So we had to trick a bank to give us like a $5 million loan where me and my partner had like no equity. So had no leverage for a loan. And we had to find investors, and we had to have a seller who was very flexible. So in some way, the universe like manifested this, and I definitely don't have the talents enough to put this together without a whole crap load of luck on my side. So that was my like I knew like once I could get here and do it, like I could probably be pretty successful because I did it at the company when I stood up the general contracting. Anytime I've had a business position, I've always had pretty pretty wild results in anything that I went and led. I've always just had this weird knack for everything business. Like I have this business empathy, I call it, where I have very little human empathy, which makes me a crappy dad and crappy husband, as my wife would say. But like the business empathy piece, I've made a lot of great decisions in business, just understanding the other person's perspective from like the nuanced framework and how they operate. And I've spent a lot of time connecting those two things together. And that's what I'm really good at. That's how I could, really get a bank to give us a loan when we had like, probably shouldn't, like on paper, there's no way we should have got a loan, but just like connecting, like how all those frameworks work together and we were able to, be in the investor team, and my partner, Zach, we were able to pull everything over the line.
Well, I mean, if you could put together, if you have relationships, if you have great communication skills, you have a great business plan. I mean, there's definitely, I would imagine, someone to take that risk, and maybe not to you specifically, or maybe to you specifically, based on your buy-in, as you mentioned, into the company. But any company that's looking at growth, if they're looking at how we can scale, right, how we can grow, there's definitely going to be a finance structure in place. Whether it's equity, debt, cash. Maybe
Yep.
walk through your business experience, explain to the listeners, equity versus
Mhm.
debt versus cash. How does that play a role in, different options as you're looking to finance?
Yeah, so I guess the easiest way I can explain it is right. Equity is the side of business that exponentiates. Right, most wealthy people in the world have been wealthy through equity. Like Jeff Bezos, he started off owning 100% of the company. I believe he sold like 20% of his company at one point for like $1 million. That was it. And equity is the piece. I think Jeff Bezos now only owns like 17 or 18% of the company, but equity is the piece that exponentiates. Right, I'm starting out with 1,000 shares, and then at some point I have 10,000, and at some point I have 100,000, and then I IPO and there's millions, and I own 20% of those millions of shares. Right, that's equity. That's the exponentiation of the business. Debt is like essentially thinking about it as like owning a house for a business. So you're using debt instruments through banks, and you're using that instrument by saying, okay, I'm going to take on debt, and that's going to convert to a monthly expense or a monthly exposure, and I need to be able to exponentiate that exposure. Right, so because right, if I have debt, I can't, and you can think of like your employees almost as debt. Right, they're like a weekly or biweekly monthly expense, and you can't run a business by making $1 for their expense. Right, so like to your point, you need to be making 10, 15, $20 per every dollar they cost you, or else you
Mhm.
don't exist as a business. So those like debt and equity are like the two big instruments that are in the world. How businesses are evaluated, broad stroke, is something known as net operating income. So most businesses are bought and sold on some type of multiple of net operating income. So this is what your net operating income is. And usually for most in the construction industry, we're between like a 2.5 and 3.5 multiple of your net operating income. And that's what your business is worth.
Yeah, and that's a great breakdown. And to your point, the equity is, yeah, your ownership in the company. You mentioned the debt of employees, a good example because you're probably 6 units or so. I mean, if you're paying someone 150 grand, you need to be generating $1 million in revenue, roughly, 6.6. I mean,
Hmm.
somewhere in there. 5 or 6 points would be really for an employee. Um, and then as you look at, the cash aspect, or as you mentioned, net income, that's the payout. If your company's doing, you know, $2, $3 million of profit, ideally when you go to sell that is 2, 5, 3x, right?
Correct.
If
Yep.
you're making 2 million, ideally you're selling it for 6, and that's kind of maybe your cash cow to retirement, whatever it may be. Um, and those numbers do change. I mean, the reality is, I'm sure you've seen, Clark. I mean, depending on the business and industry, I mean, that net income multiplier could be higher. When it's a fee business, it could be a little more challenging. We touched on this earlier. That yeah, I mean, there elements of social media and presence and reputation, and so many things that go into construction. That's why it's fascinating for you to come in with what you did. I mean, not that it's a foreign industry, but there's so much risk, as you know, Clark, and you're coming in to
Hmm.
run, this national company. You've done some amazing things. I mean, just the business acumen has just been so impressive. This conversation and just understanding, kind of your mentality as you looked at O'Connor Company and what you've grown, to make this such a wonderful company that it is today.
Yeah, and not enough can be said about like I didn't get here by myself. Like I am very fortunate enough to have spent my career around people who saw something in me and spent time developing me and giving me a lot of opportunities, whether it was consulting, and a lot of those opportunities landed like way in front of like well sooner than what I deserved. And that's a huge shout out to kind of the heritage, so to speak, of that's where every person starts. And even yourself is a great example. Like the journey isn't, a lot of people love the view, but they hate the climb, so to speak, right? That is like
Right.
everybody is like, what's my quick thing that I can do? I'm like, there is no quick thing. Like where I am now is like 10 years ago when I worked for Gap. I woke up at 4 in the morning, went to work till 4 in the afternoon, drove down to New York City to go to class, to get back home at like midnight to do the same thing next day. And I did that for like a year and a half to get my MBA. And there's a lot of grind that happens. And I don't think there's enough conversation that really goes into how hard the climb is. And then there is certainly a lot of conversation about what the view looks like, and there's some conversation around how hard it is to keep the view. But the climb is what builds character, right?
It's funny you say that because there's a TikTok. I don't know. It's in my FYP page, for you page, right? That comes up all the time, and it's always like, people look at your success and they admire, they love the success, they want the success, but they don't want what it takes to get to that success, right? Because that journey, as you mentioned, the climb, it's difficult, right? There's grueling days. As great as you and I can sit here and talk about, understanding a business, or the wonderful people that have allowed us to get to this point, have been instrumental in our lives, and helped us, and the wonderful clients and so forth. I mean, the reality is it's a grind every day. I mean, it's you got to get up and work, Clark. It doesn't just come to you. How did you how did you learn about the summit, out of curiosity?
So I was looking for ways to like expand my thinking. So and the internal dialogue was like, hey, do we go to this summit? It's all residential. Like,
Hmm.
what can we learn there? And then I thought like so 20 years ago, like the C-suite of American companies used to never cross pollinate. Like if you were the
Right.
car guy, you only stayed in the car industry, and you would go from Ford to Chrysler, whatever. You would stay in that same silo, and then they had this interesting swapping where like you would switch industries. So I thought it was very important to join to go to the coalition, go to the summit, and see like, hey, I wonder how other sectors of construction do things. And I out of like right the last day of the summit, I was on the phone with like my marketing team for like an hour and a half, like right before that last dinner, just unloading everything in chat. It's like huge chats of like all these. I mean, I had pages of notes, and I took so much from it. And it's again back to that kind of dare to dream perspective. Like no matter what, you can find a business lesson out of any industry, no matter how unparalleled it is to yours. And I love trying to find those lessons, because a lot of times you can find a way to work that in. One of the touch points that I took from the coalition that I love is how you guys go around each week and you take a video of the job
Hmm.
and you just send it in a text message. We're actually starting that with our public clients,
It's
and
amazing.
they rave it. They with no tech, no nothing, just a video, and that's it. And they love it. And we've created all these touch points, and that was the big thing that's not in public projects. And what we've already seen in like the month since that coalition is we're starting to run the projects even if there is a CM on the job, because we have so many touch points of great communication that it's impossible for for the polarity to be any other way, and it makes the project feel amazing. And that was one of the big things I brought out of the coalition, is like, how do we build systems that make these guys feel like, hey, we're building a luxury home for them, and it's very tailored and it's very specific, and it's very calculated. And that, I mean, that's just one example of many that I brought out of the coalition.
I love that. I mean, to your point, I found so much benefit in my career as I've networked with other professionals in business outside of construction. You know,
Yep.
even if even the crossover, whether it be interior design or architecture, right? There's so much that you can learn. Even someone such as yourself, Clark, who's in a totally different field than I am. I mean, we're still in the same industry, kind of, but but to your point, where I've gone to these seminars or coalitions, and that's the thing, the level of talent. You have people such as you that's so seasoned in business and have a totally different model than other people there, and you build these friendships. I mean, I love that aspect. And again, this has been an incredible episode, Clark. I mean, I'm sure every listener is just like, the business acumen expertise you offer. Just, I'm so glad you came on today. So, what do you do for fun?
Oh, I'm a pilot. So my
Wow.
as my wife would say, I fly around the country and live the bachelor life. But no, I love, one of my favorite things to do is oh man, like Saturday morning, nice weather, get up with one or two of my kids, and we'll go fly an hour and grab pancakes and have breakfast. And it's really it's a awesome privilege to be able to fly, and it's a great hobby. So and it helps out a lot for work on those national platforms, to be able to show up anywhere in a couple hours.
That's the greatest luxury, is being able to fly private. There's no doubt about that.
Absolutely.
As they say, the PJ, the personal jet. Where can our listeners find you?
So obviously, again, best place to follow me is on LinkedIn. You can Google me on LinkedIn, and we're working on Instagram. Again, another thing coming out of the coalition is like getting that social media presence going. So right now, LinkedIn is the best place to follow me, and then we got Instagram coming up right behind it.
Man, Clark, you've been incredible. I can't thank you enough for making time for us today. So thank you for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Brad. Really appreciate it.
If you get value from the show, please support us by giving a 5-star rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. And I also have a favor to ask. We've had some incredible guests that come on and share their wisdom, their knowledge about their business. So if you have friends or family members that could benefit from those episodes, please share it with them, as well as any other business owners that you're networking with that could get value from the podcast or certain episodes. Please share those as well. Again, subscribe, make sure you're following. Any questions that you have, topics. We've had listeners reach out about certain guests that we should have on the show. Again, brad.l@aftconstruction.com. Email me for topics to address, guests that we should have on, and even if you think you'd be a great guest for the show. So again, thank you for all your support, and we'll see you next time.